I stumbled backward, tripping over my boots, and hit the dirt. From the hole, the voice grew louder. It wasn't just repeating my log anymore. It was splicing my words together to form new sentences. Marcus, shattered, safety, copy that, come down. I grabbed my pack and ran. I sprinted blind into the tree line, branches whipping across my face, my lungs burning in the freezing air. I didn't make it out before nightfall. The topography didn't make sense anymore. Every time I climbed an incline, the slope leveled out, dumping me back into a ravine choked with dead ferns. The woods were rearranging themselves around me, herding me back toward the basin. I hid inside the hollow base of a dead cedar tree, turning my radio off, pulling my jacket over my mouth to muffle my breathing. That night, the forest finally made noise. All around my hiding spot, moving in slow circles through the dark, I heard footsteps, 2 legs, heavy strides crushing pine needles underfoot, and with every step, the thing in the woods spoke to me using my own voice. Hey, is anyone out here? Just get the base elevation data. Please, God, please help me. I want to go home. The most horrifying part wasn't that it was mimicking me. It was the fact that I hadn't said those last 2 phrases yet. It was practicing what it expected me to scream when it found me. I sat in that tree for 14 hours until daylight broke and the footsteps stopped, retreating back toward the basin. I didn't stop running until I hit the paved logging road. When I reached the office, I dropped my keys on my supervisor's desk and walked out without submitting a single coordinate. I threw my gear into a metal trash can behind a gas station and set it on fire. If you explore the backcountry this season, remember, first, watch the silence. If birds stop singing, you crossed into something else's territory. Second, never call into an acoustic shadow. If your voice doesn't echo, something absorbed it. Third, if you hear someone calling in your own voice, do not answer. Keep your eyes on the dirt. Never look back toward the clearing. Nothing answered. No movement in the ferns, no snap of twigs. Just the towering, blackened trunks of the Douglas firs standing like silent pillars in the gathering dark. I didn't sleep that night. I sat inside my tent with my headlamp off, listening to the outside world through the directional microphone. For 8 hours, the audio meter registered 0 decibels. At dawn, I packed my camp as fast as my stiff fingers allowed. My gut was screaming at me to hike back up the ridge and tell my boss the contract was a bust, but pride and a stubborn rationalization that I had picked up cross-channel radio interference on my mic kept my feet moving deeper into the sector. By noon, I found why the drones had failed. In the exact center of Sector 14, the trees abruptly stopped, forming a perfectly circular clearing about 200 yards across. In the middle of this clearing stood a house. It wasn't an abandoned pioneer cabin or a ranger station. It was a modern 2-story suburban home, white vinyl siding, black asphalt shingles, and a neat wooden front porch. It looked like it had been lifted by a crane out of a quiet cul-de-sac in Seattle and dropped into the middle of an untamed wilderness. As I walked closer, my boots sinking into dead yellow grass, my mind struggled to process the geometry. There were no roads leading here, no power lines, no construction tracks. When I reached the front porch, the illusion broke. The house had no depth. It was a facade. It was a single wall of timber and vinyl siding, propped up from behind by massive, unpeeled logs braced into the dirt. There was a front door and 4 glass windows, but behind them was nothing, just open air and the dark tree line behind it. I walked around to the back of the prop wall. That was when I saw the borehole. Directly behind the fake front door, someone, or something, had excavated a shaft into the earth. It was roughly 10 feet by 10 feet, perfectly square, with walls cut so smooth they looked polished. There was no pile of dirt or stone anywhere in the clearing to account for the displaced earth. I knelt at the edge and shone my tactical flashlight down. The beam cut through the dark for about 50 feet before being swallowed entirely. Then, from the bottom of the shaft, I heard my own voice. It was faint, drifting up from the subterranean pitch black, but the cadence was unmistakable. Weather clear. Temperature 54. entered the tree line at the western ridge. It was reciting the audio note I had recorded into my handheld dictaphone the day before. But it wasn't a recording playing through a speaker. The pronunciation was slightly wrong. The syllables were stretched, wet, and vibrating, like someone trying to speak human words through a throat full of thick oil. If you work in forestry, land surveying, or deep woods conservation, there is an unspoken rule you learn within your first year. The woods do not belong to you. You are a visitor. And like any guest in a stranger's home, you should never overstay your welcome after the lights go out. For 6 years, I worked as a field cartographer for a private environmental assessment firm in the Pacific Northwest. My job was straightforward. I went where satellites couldn't. When dense canopy cover, complex topography, or anomalous atmospheric interference made aerial LiDAR scans unreliable, my team was sent in on foot with GPS receivers, acoustic mappers, and heavy-duty hiking boots. I loved the isolation. I loved the quiet. But 3 months ago, I handed in my resignation, left my security deposit on my apartment, and moved to a third-floor condo in the middle of downtown Chicago. I want concrete under my feet. I want the sound of traffic, sirens, and thousands of breathing, shouting human beings surrounding me 24 hours a day. I am telling you this because the company is currently hiring my replacement. And if you see a contract listing for a topographic survey of Sector 14 in the North Cascades, I need you to understand what is waiting for you out there. The brief my supervisor handed me was unusual from the start. Normally, we deploy in pairs for safety, but my regular partner, Marcus, had been sidelined with a shattered collarbone from a mountain bike accident. Because the client was paying a massive premium for a 24-hour turnaround, I agreed to take the contract solo. Just get the base elevation data and map the creek beds, my supervisor told me, tapping the paper map. The drone scans came back unusable. Something down in the basin is scrambling the altimeters. My first field note read, Day 1, 1400 hours. Weather clear. Temperature 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Entered the tree line at the western ridge. Immediate drop in ambient noise. No wind inside the valley. Canopy is denser than expected. Old-growth Douglas firs, trunks easily 6 to 8 feet in diameter. GPS accuracy is degraded to plus or minus 30 meters, but the analog compass is holding steady. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't visual. It was acoustic. If you spend enough time in temperate rainforests, you learn the background hum of the ecosystem. You hear bird calls, the chattering of squirrels, the rustle of underbrush, the high-pitched drone of insects, and the creak of wood under wind pressure. By hour 3 of my descent into the valley floor, every single one of those sounds had vanished. It wasn't a sudden silence. It faded out so gradually that I didn't consciously register it until I stopped to tie my boot. When the crunch of my gravel-treading footsteps ceased, the silence that hit my ears felt heavy, almost pressurized, like the air inside an anechoic chamber. When I swallowed, the click in my throat sounded as loud as a gunshot. I set up my base camp in a small clearing near a dried-up creek bed at 5 o'clock. By 6, the sun had dropped behind the western ridge, plunging the valley into a deep, bruised twilight. Part of my mapping protocol involved taking acoustic decay measurements. You fire a blank cartridge from a starter pistol and use a directional microphone to record how long the sound takes to bounce off the valley walls and decay into nothing. It helps identify unseen rock faces and canyon depth. I set my recorder on a tripod, loaded a blank into the starter pistol, held it above my head, and pulled the trigger. The crack of the gun should have echoed for miles. Instead, the sound died instantly. It didn't bounce. It didn't reverberate. The woods absorbed the gunshot clean out of the air within a half second. It was physically impossible for a basin that narrow not to produce an echo. I checked my recording levels. The waveform on my digital monitor showed a sharp spike for the gunshot, followed by a flat line. But as I stared at the screen, a tiny secondary ripple appeared on the graph. It was faint, barely above the noise floor, 5 seconds after the shot. I put on my monitoring headphones and hit playback, cranking the gain up by 30 decibels. On track 4, at timestamp 1814, there was the loud crack of the gunshot clipping the microphone, followed by 4 seconds of dead, unnatural silence. Then, at the 5-second mark, a faint, metallic, wet click, and 1 second later, A voice, low and breathless, whispering directly into the left stereo channel. Copy that. I ripped the headphones off so fast I nearly knocked the tripod over. I stood frozen, my hand resting on the hilt of my bear spray, scanning the tree line. "Hello," I called out. My own voice sounded flat and smothered in the thick air.